morning, curious minds of the interwebs. I'm Alexa, the resident ooky spooky girly, and welcome to the top 5 scary real angels caught on camera. Number 5, Newberry Angel. Alrighty, I'm kicking off today with the one story I know that, as of the time of this recording, still has the photos floating around somewhere on the interwebs. Before people start yelling at any of us in the comments, just remember that with how much the government tries to cover up true stories, it's pretty often that footage and videos of anomaly events tend to go missing. If you don't believe me, take a look at a lot of the videos where I chatter on about spottings and found footage, and if it isn't in the video while I'm talking, it's because between the time of my research and the time of filming, whatever it was disappeared. When I tell y'all that I spent hours looking for the most credible resources, I mean it. So sure, it would be easy to toss together 5 random TikToks and call it a day. But that's not why y'all come to Top 5 Scary. You come here for the good stuff. Before I forget, if you could help us out by liking this video and commenting, I'd really appreciate it. Every bit truly helps. But anywho, after that interlude, let's get to the point. This tale comes from Gerald Brown, located in Newbury, Massachusetts, back in 2017. He called into a radio show and also sent them an email after taking a photo that he couldn't understand out in the woods near his home. To set the scene for y'all, it was in the middle of the field, smack dab in the middle of the day, around 2:22 p.m. in September, and Gerald was, walking out in the woods, which sounds like an ideal day to me. Fall is my personal favorite season. I've always been a pumpkin-loving girly since before, pumpkin spice was trendy. I still remember the first time I had a pumpkin muffin from Tim's back when they were good, and my first pumpkin pie blizzard from Dairy Queen. Sorry, I know. Sidetracked again. The ADHD is really making itself known today. So Gerald says that he tends to be out in the woods all the time and has never seen anything like what he's about to describe before. So originally he thought it was just like a plastic bag floating in the air, and sadly pollution is so common nowadays that would definitely make sense. So he decided to try and, take a photo of the bag, but it was blown out with the light and totally overexposed the picture. Oh, before I forget, this is a man who still uses a flip phone, so sadly no fancy schmancy updated phone tech is going to help here. At the time of me recording this, we had a copy of the original photo, so we can show it now if it still exists, and Gerald still has the original phone and the original photograph, and it has been sent to many different iPhones. Apparently he sent it to everybody he knew in an attempt to get answers. So when he took a closer look at the bag, he realized it was moving across the field from, the left to the right at around 4 miles an hour. And it was a little bit faster than somebody who would be walking, and didn't change shape, but it also wasn't like floating. So he took the picture, he thought it was like a torso sized, maybe like 2 to 3 feet, 4 feet max, before realizing this angel was actually closer to 8 feet tall. This being was literally moving from the left to the right across the field, and kept moving and disappeared into the woods without making a sound. And haunts our narrator to this day. Every time he looks at the photograph, he gets goosebumps. And at the end of the day, he's just glad he saw it and it didn't see him. This man works in law enforcement and describes himself as very skeptical of a lot of stuff, but a logical thinker, and this just defies all logic. And over a year later, he still hadn't figured out what it was, and it haunts him to this day. Heck, he has trouble looking at the photographs sometimes. Number 4, angels in the classroom. This is a situation where the event was scary, and once again, we have footage, but I suppose the angels would be more caring than scary. But anyway, I'll leave that up to your interpretation. Oh, and not to sound like a broken record, but trigger warning. I'm about to talk about Columbine, and I promise I won't be offended if you skip ahead since it's a bit of a touchy topic. So the small town of Cokeville, Wyoming was the site of a parent's worst nightmare on May 16th of 1986 when a mentally disturbed man and his wife entered an elementary school with weapons and a homemade gasoline explosive device. The man's name was David Young, a former town marshal. He had been the town's only police officer for 6 months during 1979, and when he was fired for misconduct, he moved to Tucson, Arizona. He and his wife returned to Cokeville in 1986 and carried out their insidious plan. Young had a manifesto called Zero Infinity and proclaimed this is a revolution, as he and his wife took an entire generation hostage and wouldn't release them until he was given $300 million and a personal phone call from Ronald Reagan, the president of the States at the time. While keeping all of the young people in a single room and standing in the middle of it, the Youngs began a standoff that would last over 2.5 hours. David left the room, leaving his wife alone, and it was then that the device went off instantly, killing Doris. Now the explosive had been on the shopping cart, and even though it was homemade, it was powerful enough to destroy a section of the school. Moments before the explosion, David handed the shoelace and clothespin to his wife, and like I said, he left. Now our young witness apparently didn't realize how sensitive the trigger mechanism was and accidentally caused it to go off, and the blast alone knocked her off her feet. The room obviously erupted in chaos as young folks ran screaming in the dark, smoke-filled room. While many folks, including our storyteller's young friends Amber Kemp and Brandy Prowse, escaped through the window, our witness crawled towards a light at the doorway. She crossed paths with David Young at the door, and he tried to grab her shirt, but the tide of running people prevented him. She escaped but saw flames on her shirt and felt an odd tickling sensation on her shoulder. She started rolling to try to put it out, but the burning sensation only intensified. She was saved from further burns when some teachers found her and slapped out the flames, and they told her to run. Now running towards the blast, Young started to randomly spray the area with tiny explosives. Some Some young folks were grazed by the whizzing tiny things, but none were hit. Through the chaos, everyone was eventually accounted for except for the Youngs. Upon finding his burning wife, Young had ended her and then returned to the bathroom and ended himself. But the miraculous thing is that despite everything, the Youngs were the only casualties. Some folks suffered severe flash burns from the explosion and some minor wounds, but were all alive. So in the last 20 years, this event has become known as the Miracle of Cokesville. Here's the thing though, experts called to the scene were stunned. They couldn't figure out why the school was still intact when an explosive that size should have obliterated the entire side of the building, leaving, everyone obsolete. The young folks began to tell stories of angels who appeared to them and instructed them to move to a corner of the classroom because the device was about to explode. Some reported seeing beautiful figures in white, while others said that they saw long dead relatives telling them not to be afraid. Many later said that there was an angel in the room for every person and that each of them was protecting their own specific charge, which I think is just so amazing. Number 3, Coney Island Angels. Ugh, Coney Island. That's a place that's currently in my top 10 list of places I need to visit in the world, and mainly just to go watch the Coney Island sideshow. I've been lucky enough to see a small show from some of their performers, and I've been crushing hard on Alaska Lost Boy ever since. Seriously, look him up. He's incredible. But back on track we go. So time to travel back to a tale from September of 1977. On Tuesday afternoon of that week, a few minutes after 6 o'clock, our narrator noticed from his window a very peculiar, solitary, vapory object in the heavens. Its position was about where the constellation of the Dipper would be at that hour, due north and 35 degrees above the horizon. In magnitude and contour, it marked a degree resembling a human form, head, body, and nether limbs, the body or limbs robed in shadowy drapery. Pardon the flowery language, I'm doing my best to quote from the original statements here. The head, which was of brighter luminosity on the crown and forehead, had thick flowing hair, and the whole figure was extended horizontally, with the head eastward and the front downwards. But there was another feature quite as marked, and that had wings projecting upwards and backwards from the shoulder, and what do you know, looked like a typical angel. Flying in mid-heaven, considered as a cloud, it was remarkable that it kept the same outline continuously, which is kind of uncommon in those vapory objects, as it progressed pretty quickly in the eastbound direction. The luminosity of the shadowy angel was of a golden white, and it presented a very beautiful appearance against the blue background of the sky. In addition to the, outline of the object, the interest it was in was greatly increased by its being at the time the only one visible in the whole northern heavens, except some low-lying black clouds on the horizon. Make of that what you will, but a few years later, another flying being was seen over Coney Island. It was described as a man with bat's wings and frog's legs. Now the face of the man could be distinctly seen, and it wore a cruel and determined expression. The movements made by the object closely resembled those of a frog in the act of swimming, with his hind legs and flying with his front legs. When you add that this monster waved his wings in answer to a train's whistle and was of a deep, dark black color, the alarming nature of the apparition can be imagined. It hasn't been seen in a while, but if it does, maybe it could also join the sideshow? Number 2. Ottawa Angel. Time for the most recent spotting of this list on September 17th of 2013 in the small town of Maitland along the St. Lawrence River here in Ontario. So our storyteller had just settled down to enjoy a morning coffee on their day off until they received a call from an old friend in Ottawa who, wanted to meet for coffee. And they're like, might as well go for another one. They lived right beside the highway on-ramp and were on their way rather quickly on that sunny yet windy fall day. And as usual, when driving, they put on some good music and proceeded to enjoy the approximately 1 hour long scenic drive to Ottawa, which is a route they claim they're super familiar with. It was originally an uneventful trip, which had passed rather quickly as they began to approach the Ottawa city limits at around 12:20 in the afternoon. But at this point, in broad daylight without a cloud in the sky, something ahead in the distance resembling a very large seagull, due to its white and gray appearance, up in the sky, caught their eye. Something was amiss, and within a blink or two, our storyteller noticed that the wings did not match their initial interpretations. This thing was further away and much larger than, first perceived. They then realized that something looked like outstretched arms connected to a human being torso with a head and legs that more closely resembled a long serpent-looking tail flowing behind this winged being at the time. As they drove more, they could clearly identify this as a winged humanoid with a very dark body color and a massive set of swan-like wings. Now these wings were seemingly oversized for its body and moved very slowly in an almost 180-degree rotation, nearly touching its wingtips at the top and the bottom of its graceful movements during flight. It was still fairly far ahead of our driver and appeared to be descending slowly along its path, which now paralleled the highway. The brilliant white wings took on a light gray appearance as they became shadowed from the bright sun by their own movements at times during flight. Now at this point our storyteller was beyond certain that they were not mistaken about what they were seeing. This creature was clearly humanoid, but not like any human. His facial expression seemed highly intelligent, yet he portrayed a disdain and contemptuous demeanor as he looked over and down with a confident air of supremacy. His face was just as dark gray as the rest of his body, and he possessed a very square jawline with warrior-like predominant cheekbones. This creature also had dominant eye ridges, which casted deep shadows over portions of his face, including his upper center lip due to the shadows from its nose under the sun. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Including to his upper center lip due to the shadow from its nose under the sun. Besides the fact that this giant winged being descended from the sky was, the sheer size, dark color, and bulky muscle mass of the body, the dark color and bulky muscle mass of his body truly made this creature so fearsome. Our narrator estimated its height to be around 12 to 15 feet tall when compared to the surrounding trees, and its wingspan was disproportionately large for the body size, stretching 25 to 30 feet across. Now this being, now just above treetop level, began to glide as opposed to when its wings were flapping in full flight at its previous greater altitude. After it flew over a thin row of trees, this angel began to shift its body to a vertical position as he flared his wings out, even more to slow down, now just a few meters from the ground, directly to the right of our narrator, approaching an open field just ahead of them. Now this thing flew out of sight, and good thing it did, because who knows what would have happened to our poor narrator otherwise. She never saw it again, but who knows. Number 1. Angels over Chicago. So Chicago-based private investigator Manuel Navarrete was hanging out with his friends in a bakery parking lot on February 5th of this year, just chatting and vibing, as one does, when the group noticed something standing on top of the flea market across the parking lot. It looked like a pitch-black, 7-foot-tall man with wings that were wider than a car and red eyes that were as bright as taillights. Now the creature was observing Manuel and his buddies, closely making chirping noises that the group could hear very clearly from the distance they were at, which was around like 50 yards away even without the height difference. The group continued their staring contest with the being for almost 10 minutes before it flew straight into the air and over the group of dudes, watching them the entire time. Now the men fought the temptation to run, not wanting to leave the creature anywhere or trigger a prey response, and they estimate that the entire encounter happened between 11 to 11:30 p.m. It was a rather clear evening, so there was no chance of clouds warping what they saw. All of you folks saw was something fun to ponder over. This is the 8th confirmed sighting reported in the area since 2017, and no one is positive what the heck this creature is, but my theory is that it's definitely an angel. And that brings us to the end of our time, so don't forget to like and subscribe for more content from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.